returned from Central America, insisting that the drug war must continue. At the same time, a growing number of Latin American leaders are calling for the decriminalization or legalization of drugs. The presidents of Guatemala, Colombia, Costa Rica, and El Salvador have all recently suggested support for some form of decriminalization or legalization of drugs as a remedy to some of the violence that is occurring in some of these countries. Where do we stand on this? Where should the U.S. stand on this? Sorry, I look at all of you waiting for someone to raise their hand. I spent too many hours in class today. Aggies for Ron Paul.
The war on drugs, I think the title is great. It really is just a war. We don't need any more wars. The idea that the federal government, by illegal, making something illegal, will stop its citizens from doing it, I also think ridiculous. I think that if every man and woman has a right to do what they want, as long as it doesn't affect the freedoms or well-being of any other person. We're spending billions of dollars on this war. We're incarcerating more people than any other country. We're spending so much money on putting people in jail for using a substance that they ingest into their own body, in their own home. If a person harms another person, breaks that law, there's no doubt that that person should face the consequences of that. But if I want to sit in my own home and do drugs on my own time that isn't hurting anyone, the fact that we're making this super illegal and literally waging a war on it is not only it's getting people killed, it's making the taxpayers spend billions of dollars to enforce these laws, and it's going against the idea of civil liberties. We are a free people. We should be able to do what we want. If heroin was made legal today, would everyone just go out and do heroin all of a sudden? No. This idea that the law is stopping people from doing drugs is just insane.
Okay, Aggie solidarity.
Well, going off of that, the war on drugs is a failure. It is something that has, at least for the majority of the world's people, it is something that is killing tens of thousands of people. In the last 5 years, it's killed 30,000 in Mexico alone. It's estimated in Guatemala that for every ton of cocaine that passes through the country, 8 people are killed. In Honduras, it's 20 people per ton. And we're largely responsible for it. Legalization needs to be part of the solution, both here and there. And going along with that, we need massive programs in order to help people who are addicted, which is something that we don't do. We need to stop throwing people in jail. Right now we're fighting the war on drugs in 2 places. We're fighting them in the inner city against poor blacks and against poor Latinos, and we're fighting them across our borders, especially in Latin America, against the poor there. And that's something that is immoral, it's wrong, it needs to end. And more than that, just like our monitor was saying, governments in Guatemala, in Central America, in South America, have been proposing legalization. That's something that we need to listen to, and we need to, unlike what we just did yesterday, the subsecretary for the drug war, essentially, who went into Honduras, who is a puppet government of ours, and kind of overstayed, superseded the conference that the Central American governments had had on legalization, went in the day after and announced a brand new military plan in order to try to overrun the drug cartels. But even more than that, generally in Latin America and in the rest of the world, we need to stop the policies of trying to tell the rest of the world what to do. And that's exactly what we do in the drug war. We actually give grades to each country on their participation in the drug war and how well we're doing. And those grades correspond to how much foreign aid and things like that they get. We need to stop going into places and telling countries what they can and cannot do, what the best way to develop themselves is. That's showing our imperialist mindset, and that's what needs to end.
Okay, NMSU Democrats.
We Just to summarize the efforts of what's been going on in our neighboring countries, the war on drugs has not been as successful as we would have liked. There has been some impact though. Just in the last 2.5 years, there's been a 75% increase in the seizure of currency, 31% in drugs, and 64% in as far as weapons goes. So there are other methods to address this issue, but we are working with our neighboring countries to help them in whatever capacity they would like the United States to help. For instance, the Merida initiative, which is helping Mexico combat their drug problem. They want to take on the drug problem, so we're supporting that. But if other countries who would want to take a different approach, I think the United States is certainly open to that.
Any rebuttal from?
I think we're good.
Okay. Okay, anyone who has watched the news in the past week or so probably could not escape the news that George Clooney was arrested protesting outside the Sudanese embassy, calling people's attention to conditions and violence in southern Sudan. So I'd like us to focus in this next question on the U.S. role in human rights issues in Sudan, Uganda, other parts of Africa. Does the protection of civilians become the responsibility of the international community when their own governments fail to protect them? Aggie solidarity.
Well, I think the international community has a role to play in preventing these sorts of situations and everything, but generally we hear two options of how to solve these things. Generally it's intervention, militarily, or a sort of foreign aid, economic embargo, some sort of economic intervention. Those are generally the two options that we hear. Those are overly simplifying the problem. These are complex problems that need more than those sort of simple, that sort of simple rhetoric. Most of the foreign aid is just covering up the problems, even perpetuating the problems. And we've tried military interventions. We've tried to install governments and ensure stability. It generally hasn't worked historically. And you know, where do we decide to intervene? We can't police the whole world. We don't have the resources to do it. We don't have the moral authority to do it. And generally where we choose to intervene is because we have economic interests there. And that's something that every one of us should be appalled by. But again, we can't police the whole world. So what we need to do to address these sort of things is first we need to look at we, as well as other countries in the first world, contribute to those problems in the first place. The problems that Africa has, the problems that Latin America has, places in Asia have. And figure out how we need to restructure our political, our policies, or our economy in order to help fix that. That's the first thing we need to do. Then we can try to identify places where genocides, things like that might happen, and work with those people to try to prevent it. But not try to tell them what to do, or try to go in and force them not to kill each other. This isn't by saying that we can go in and help them with troops. We can go in, we can train people, we can train doctors, we can train teachers, we can do that sort of thing. But you know what, we can't just go in with this colonial mindset of we're going to give them what they need, right? Or we're going to tell them what they're doing, they're going to listen to us. That's ignoring the roots of the problem. And so this is where our idea of having sort of expanded international justice systems that hold bad governments accountable would really help. And I don't see really anyone else other than the radical left proposing that sort of thing.
Okay, the NMSU Democrats.
I lived abroad in a politically isolated country. They are represented globally, but they hold little to no clout. This seems like a great idea of not being involved in other countries, but the citizens of the country, they're limited in their future aspirations. There's little hope for financial gain. There's little hope for social movement. Most citizens live their lives knowing that their status, no matter what their personal accomplishments they may attain in their life, will ever change. The United States is the biggest, most influential power in the world, and I personally applaud the current administration's handling of these foreign policy issues. We need to be involved, but we need to have limitations. We need to do it through the UN, through regional government involvement, and protect these humanistic values. I think that the United States is on the right side of history. By doing these things, we're aligning ourselves with people around the world and their aspirations for freedom, democracy, and universal human rights.
Okay, Aggies for Ron Paul.
To address the Democrats really quickly, you talk about how this administration has been doing well internationally. I don't see how bombs are foreign aid. That's me personally. I don't think that the United States has some moral high ground to go in and intervene in all of these countries. What gives us the right to go and police the world and nation build? You know, I think the idea that American taxpayers can just somehow magically cure the world of all its evil is ridiculous. I think that the best way is to stay out of these things and to lead by example. I also want to bring up something interesting. You mentioned George Clooney in this question, and something else that George Clooney has recently done as a private citizen is funded satellite usage in, I think it is Sudan, to help resistance movements avoid the tanks. He personally, as a private citizen, funded these satellites to help these people evade tank attacks from these people that were trying to kill them. And I think that's great. That's not American tax dollars. That's not, you know, people being forced to fund things that they don't morally agree with. It's one man with the money that he earned on his own going out there and making the world a better place. And we can do that. We can do that as American citizens. We don't need the American government to do these things for us. The military, you know, it's not the world police. Our military is not the world police. And we need to stop nation building, and we need to stop bombing countries that were simultaneously giving billions of dollars in foreign aid. We need to bring our troops home and bring that money home and focus on America and lead by example. And as private citizens, we can change the world, but we don't need our military's guns and bombs to do it for us.
Any response, Aggie Solidarity?
Yes, a couple of things. First of all, while I agree with the sentiment, but I don't believe that private individuals alone can or necessarily should be trusted in order to solve the world's problems. Really, you're just giving more power to the economic elite that already control the government and the rest of the country in the first place. But second of all, a couple of other points. You know, I would ask the college Democrats, you know, why did we intervene in Libya but not Syria? Why not Mali? Why haven't we done anything in Saudi Arabia? Why haven't we done anything in any other countries in the world where there are atrocities going on? You know, why should we have the ability to pick and choose where we intervene in? And historically, we're not on the right side of history. In the last 100 years, we've intervened. We've had coups, assassination attempts, economic embargoes, things like that in most of the countries on the face of the earth, and it hasn't turned out well so far. So what makes you think it's going to turn out well in the future?
Moving on to our next question, returning a little bit closer to home. Over 50 years ago, in February 1962, U.S. President John F. Kennedy imposed a full trade embargo on Cuba. The White House statement that day was optimistic about what the embargo could accomplish. 50 years later, Washington's restrictions on Cuba remain, making it the world's longest-running trade embargo ever. What is your view on the utility of continuing the trade embargo with Cuba? And what is your view on the future of the relationship between the U.S. and Cuba. NMSU Democrats.
Well, I want to start off with this fact. Despite the trade embargo, according to the Department of State, the United States still is the biggest donor of food and humanitarian aid to Cuba. That we didn't just abandon them. So the embargo is over 50 years old, but in 2009, President Obama made some adjustments to it to allow more family travel and further humanitarian aid. In 2011, there was even more relaxation on that embargo to allow for more purposeful travel. And so it's time to maybe reevaluate the embargo. This isn't my strong suit. I don't know what the purpose of the embargo was. I'm going to be completely honest.
To topple the Castro regime.
Well, they're not running out of brothers, so if we could wait them out for another 50 years, but it's the embargo is being reevaluated. So we've gone through one Castro, but there's still another one there. So I don't know. We'll look at that further later on.
Okay, thank you. Aggies for Ron Paul.
Well, I don't think we should have the embargo. I think that we should have free trade with Cuba and travel. I mean, you know, this was years ago. So I'm for ending the embargo, promoting free trade. You know, all an embargo is, you know, that's just. I mean, it was years ago. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Aggie Solidarity.
Well, we would like to say that pretty much the embargo is a failed policy, and it's time to end it. It's kind of archaic if you think about it. And then essentially it was never about human rights. It's because Cuba is still a threat to the U.S. and which is ridiculous. But if we're going to go about having embargoes on Cuba, then we have to have embargoes on Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Honduras, and just about half of the countries in the world who have worse human rights records than Cuba. It's because if we see Cuba as successful in any ways, especially economically, then they continue to pose a threat to us, and we don't believe that to be true whatsoever. And exactly kind of how I guess what Ron Paul was saying, like, you know, lift the embargo. However, we don't fully agree with free trade, because free trade is obviously something that has become something that's forced. And again, like what I'd like to add is that our embargo with Cuba has only created like a hostile, created hostility with other countries in Latin America. I mean, look at Venezuela. Like, look at all the other nations that are, you know, trying to establish their own form of trade, and they really do not want to include the U.S. So, that's it.
Okay. Do you have any response, NMSU Democrats? Okay. I don't know, we're getting short on time. Do we have time for one more question, or should we open it up for questions from the public?
One more question.
You're putting me in the decision-making spot. Actually, there is, I think I would like to ask one more question, which I think is something that is probably of concern to all of us, given recent events in Afghanistan and the accusations or the alleged behavior of a U.S. staff sergeant killing 16 Afghan civilians, and what this has potentially done, aside from killing people, but what this has done in terms of our relationship with Afghanistan and the Afghan people. how is there any way to remedy this? What should our role continue to be in Afghanistan? We know that we're in the process of negotiating troop withdrawal. Will that be soon enough? I know that I'm throwing a myriad of questions at you, but I think that this is a really huge and very complex issue. Aggies for Ron Paul.
For us, it's pretty simple. We need to just pull our troops out. We need to take, bring them home. War is a horrible thing. We can all agree on this. It's just horrible atrocities happening on both sides. And our troops, it shames me to hear that our troops are doing things like that. But, this is part of what happens in war. People die, innocent people die. More innocent civilians have died in this war than anyone else. Hundreds of thousands of innocent civilian lives have been lost, in these two wars, these wars in the Middle East. And we just need to end it. We need to bring our troops home and end these wars, because it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the safest thing for America. If we go out, killing innocent civilians is not making us friends. It's making these people hate us, And we are invading their country and trying to build their nation for them, and then killing them. And we find it amazing, and we're so shocked when these people hate us and want to, bring that war to us. If we pull out of all these wars, bring our troops home, non-intervention, we will start making friends and stop making enemies, and we won't hear about these horrible, horrible acts.
Okay, Aggie solidarity.
Well, I'd really like to have a debate with you guys about things that we really disagree with, because, maybe economics or something, we should set it up. Yes, us being in Afghanistan, first of all, there's really, 9/11 happened, but there's no reason for us to have occupied Afghanistan. There's no reason to military intervene. That's part of the colonial mindset. And we're continuing on with that colonial mindset by thinking that they don't have the ability, or they don't have the wherewithal to govern themselves and to create their own society how they would want to. But so we not only need to leave Afghanistan now, we need to pick up all the bases that we have in the region and the rest of the world. We need to stop flying drone attacks over Afghanistan, over Pakistan, over the rest of the world, not to mention here on the border. Not to mention the research that's done for drone aircraft here at NMSU. But, I really don't think that it would be so much worse. Whatever happens, Afghanistan's probably not going to have, in Afghanistan, it's probably not going to be a great outcome, whatever the case is. But I don't think that it's going to be so much worse if we leave than what is there right now, because we're causing a lot of the conflict that's there. And you know what, they don't want us there either. And if you've looked in the last, I think it's 15 days, there have been something like 50 NATO troops killed by actual Afghan soldiers, the people that they're supposed to be fighting with. That in itself shows that they don't want us there, and that they view us as a colonizer, which is what we are, and we need to end that role.
Okay, NMSU Democrats.
The president and the current administration are working on bringing the troops home and from Afghanistan as Afghans take ownership of the security and leadership of their country. They have stated that they do want a continuing presence until 2014, and I feel confident in their ability to go forward after that.
Yes, any response from Aggies for Ron Paul?
No, what the college Democrats have touched on when you're talking about going forward to 2014. How are we going to fund this? How are we going to fund going and funding these military campaigns? How? With the current deficit we're in, we got to look at the debt. $15 trillion in debt. How are you going to fund this? Through the funny money and the Fed? That's my question to the college Democrats.
Yes, we have spent far too much money too much of our debt is due to these wars and these foreign policies that we've had in the past. But I think it's just completely unrealistic to say that we can just pull out and still be an economically viable country, just pull out and be an isolated nation. The consequences of that in the economic market, I simply don't think that that's a viable option. We can't just get up, pack, leave, and think that everything's gonna be great and they'll solve it all themselves.
What constitutional,
Why don't we go ahead, obviously another hot topic, that's why we're here. But why don't we go ahead, maybe some of you will want to continue with some of these questions or other questions. We'd like to open it up now for questions from the audience.
I have a question.
Would you like